Show me prison, show me jail, show me a prison man whose face is growing pale, and I'll show you a young man with many reasons why, and there but for fortune may go you or I.
Thank you for tuning in to Poverty's Voice. Poverty's Voice is a little project of mine that's about exploring the voices of millions of Americans who usually don't have their voices heard, and that is those who live below the poverty line within the United States. I wanted to start off this first podcast by reading an essay that I have made in regards to protests that are currently happening within the United States. And it's an issue that I think is incredibly important in regards to what the purpose of a protest is and how we continue after protest and rioting has occurred. Thank you, and let's continue. Protest is nothing without debate. If there is anything to learn, it is this. Protest is the prelude to debate. It is limited to one role, unveiling conversations. I am not arguing that protests are an invalid method to reach the public. That would be the opposite of my proposition. What I am arguing is this. Protests are a means to debate about what we don't see or refuse to see, and they are meaningless without debate. My first cause is simple. Protest cures myopia of social problems. Myopia being a sense of blindness, an inability to see social plights. Why worry about the poor when their plights are nowhere to be seen? By bringing these problems to the attention of those who are free to ignore them through methods of civil disobedience and disruptions of life, they now become fundamentally aware of the effects of their vote or policy position. What happens after this crucial process? Does the left expect to sway voters by simply yelling their propositions, or even silencing the position of their opposition, a tactic we've seen recently? I hope dearly that this is not the case. Protest is the lens that cures this myopia when society has failed to see it. It halts the normal routine of life and brings the problems to the doorstep. The act of protest in itself is not rational. It's chaotic and emotional. It summons the emotional intuitions of both sides of the barricade. These emotional responses are hardwired from the rational network that produces the emotional output. These networks, or the reasoning of the individual, are products of whatever their experience and rationale is. If leftists, including myself, hope to change minds, it must come from rewiring those networks, not reinforcing them by summoning their emotions without invalidating their beliefs. If I were to sum up my case into propositions, it would follow as such. The purpose of protest is to make aware of issues that some don't know or choose to ignore. 2. Protest cannot change minds. It can only indulge the emotions for which reason is required to change minds. 3. Protest is an inherently emotional process. Because of this, reason must be engaged to influence the public. To progress, we must move on to debate, to change the hardwiring of the emotional response, to destroy the fallacies or misfiring that created the conclusion. Waging a war on emotions is only effective when it uproots these emotions that were created by an individual's hardwiring and experience. Change only comes from tinkering with the logic that produces the emotional response. This isn't a statement on the methods of convincing individuals, only an idea that maybe protest is half the puzzle, though it is a powerful tool in the activist arsenal. This rationale comes from inquiry into psychology and some personal experience of mine in debating others. That's something I think we truly need to address in this country, that protest isn't the end of everything. Protest doesn't stop. Protest can produce change on its own. Rioting, protest, other forms of civil disobedience can produce change. But in the long run, protest is truly, in my opinion, half the battle when it comes to swaying people's opinion to be on your side. You can't disrupt their life and go on. You disrupt their life, you only make them hate you more. You have to disrupt their life and tell them why you've disrupted their life. When they can see the issues and they can see that you're upset with these issues, it only makes them upset because you've gone against their wishes, their preconceived notions of the world, their problems. You've gone against them by engaging them. You can't leave them that way. You leave them that way, you only fuel conflict. Now, once the issues have been brought up through protest, you must then engage them in rational debate. And some issues, arguably on the left, are not up for debate, that being fascism being the most noted one, specifically when Antifa members have constantly advocated that right-wing, far right-wing groups, though that distinction is not always clear, should be silenced, and that violence can be morally used against them. That argument I can't really make. When is an argument no longer valid? When have we decided to close the door to debate? I don't think any individual can say when. I hate fascists as much as the next person. And when fascists use power to harm others, then we can have the discussion on violence. Until then, I'm not sure that is always the best solution. I would like to also share some of my experiences in a recent protest in Knoxville. And that protest was relatively, and for the most part, peaceful. And I'm very happy that it stayed that way. One of those is that there are people that we can sway into our side, into our camp. I had an interview with an individual who was notably wearing a Trump hat at a Black Lives Matter rally. And I think that's incredibly important to note that someone was brave enough to do that in the first part. And it should be noted that he's someone that you could probably sway to his side. These are people who may not be so much as informed to why they're voting or what they're voting for and the policy positions that impact others, specifically communities that are marginalized. Let me play a clip, if I may.
My cousin was in Oklahoma City. A police officer was chasing him. He didn't have any weapons. He was on foot. Instead, the police officer that shot him, he just shot him in the back. The police officer was 6 months away from retirement. They made the paramedics wait 15 minutes before they could care for him. He died right there. He bled out on the spot. The officer got forced retirement. Any punishment at all is an admission of guilt. So, for murder, a police officer gets forced retirement. Thank you.
It should be noted that this individual was probably talking about a white man who was targeted, not targeted, but killed by police, and would probably only take some simple conversation with him to explain that Black Lives Matter, the movement, is focused on black lives because the community has been targeted more so than white communities. And that's the purpose of this. And that certain policy positions from Trump and other Republican leaders impact that community and cause more police violence. Communication here with this man would undoubtedly, well, not undoubtedly, but maybe change his position. And the reason this is important is because the things that Black Lives Matter is advocating for, defunding of police, helping more social programs that help communities that are impoverished and marginalized, will also help communities that are white, predominantly white, specifically in Appalachia. it just seems that because he was wearing that hat, he would have most likely been targeted and bashed in some way at attendance, and that was never going to change his mind. And he was there to attend the rally in support. Behaviors like that will only go to push him further from the leftist positions we really hope that he can maintain or would choose to vote for. That really has been it for today, and I thank you for listening to Poverty's Voice, this podcast, which hopefully will continue much further into the future, and we'll have more video involvement later. Thank you, though, for listening to Poverty's Voice. My name is Chris Maney, and the purpose of this is to let those suffering from American poverty be heard. We want to dismantle poverty in America, but this is also, importantly, isn't just my voice. It's the voice of 40 million Americans whose voices together can reach far greater distances. Thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.